SD Gundam Battle Alliance, released August 25th, 2022, is the first and only SD Gundam game with, for lack of a better term, a full initial launch for Western audiences. By this, I mean it was released with Nintendo Switch, Xbox One, Xbox Series X and S, PlayStation 4 and 5, and PC versions available day one to the West with no workarounds. No VPN or third-party language mods required. SD Gundam G Generation Cross-Rays is the only other SD Gundam game with a Western release. However, the official version for that game only released on PC. With this title being the first of the SD IP with a full launch in the West, how was it as an introduction for console players? And was it deserving of the full launch that no SD Gundam game before it had received? Today we're going to talk about how it performs, what it has to offer, and some of the main pros, cons, and quirks that you should know before going into it. Or if you just want to hear somebody talk about it for a while. Now, before getting into the review proper, I need to make a couple things clear. First, there will be no discussion of the story, the lore, or how it respects or maintains consistency with pre-existing Gundam history or canon. The reason for this is that I have only read the Gundam Origins manga and watched the 8th MS Team and Iron-Blooded Orphans anime. So my knowledge of the many Gundam timelines is severely limited at best, and basically non-existent at worst, at least in relation to the amount of content that is covered and referenced in the game. I will also fully admit that I don't have the dedication or motivation to watch and read all irrelevant Gundam media that ties into the game for this review, as that would probably take me half a year considering just how much Gundam content there is packed into this one game. This review will purely be about gameplay and mechanics, player freedom, performance, on Xbox Series X specifically, as that's where I played it, and content. Second, I will not make any comparisons between Battle Alliance and any of the other SD Gundam or Gundam games in general, as I want to focus on Battle Alliance itself and what it alone has to offer. Lastly, this will serve more as an introductory look into the offerings of the game and provide some things to keep in mind going into it as opposed to a highly detailed, 100% completion full breakdown. So with that out of the way, let's see what it has to offer. Battle Alliance offers over 70 playable mobile suits to choose from, each with unique dialogue, sound effects, and its own collection of moves, combos, special abilities, and animations. The mobile suits fit into 3 different categories of focus: Infighter, All-Arounder, and Sharpshooter. Infighter is the short-range, physical damage-focused class, usually coming with higher health numbers and the highest melee damage numbers of the 3. Sharpshooter is the opposite, with lower health, very low melee damage stats, but very high range damage stats, similar to that of a glass cannon build. All-Arounder is exactly what it sounds like, with mobile suits of this class sitting somewhere comfortably between the other 2, with fair distribution between all stats, not really excelling or severely lacking in any. A jack of all trades and master of none, but nevertheless a plenty viable option when playing through the game. The variety of possible experiences with the mobile suit count alone is vast, and a very positive mark for the fans and players who want to keep exploring the game's mechanics long after the story mode has been completed. Funnily enough, the same unfortunately can't be said for the story progression itself. These mobile suits can be used in any mission, of which there are over 50, all pulling from any one or multiple Gundam timelines each. There are a number of different types of missions as well, so the level count may be higher or lower depending on how you personally choose to count them, which I'll get into in just a moment. Without getting too much into the story itself, but to provide at least some context, your character is pulled out of the timeline they're in and placed in many other Gundam timelines throughout the duration of the game. Basically, different Gundam timelines are having their stories altered, and you are sent to correct them. Throughout the story mode, there are break missions, true missions, chaos missions, and irregular missions. Break missions are those with an incorrect sequence of events, meaning throughout the mission there will be enemies, bosses, and/or other characters from a timeline other than the one that the mission takes place in. True missions are the corrected timeline version, meaning you are playing through the events of the original source material as they happened in said source material. Chaos missions are essentially break missions but ramped up. They typically have higher level recommendations, more enemies, and additional boss encounters. Some of them even playing more like a boss rush than anything else. Irregular missions are missions that take place specifically in the in-game timeline, and don't reference any already established Gundam canon other than its own. The changes between break, true, and chaos missions are purely the encounters and levels of enemies. This means for each of these 3 mission types, you'll be working through the exact same map as the 1 or 2 previous playthroughs. A change in your mobile suit will not result in any changes in mission outcome or story progression either. The only changes outside of the moment-to-moment gameplay itself will be the dialogue between the characters of that particular mission, and that is only during gameplay, not during cutscenes. Unfortunately, when describing the majority of the level design, the words sparse, basic, and sometimes cramped come to mind. Generally, there is little in the way of significant environmental storytelling, and you will either be playing in mostly empty open areas that have little to look at and minimal environmental detail, or narrow hallways, also with minimal environmental detail, both playing extremely linearly. That, of course, is just general though, as there are a number of missions that do have eye-catching set pieces, take place in unique and interesting locations, and provide a fair amount of differentiation from the other more repetitive level designs. However, those eye-catchers are very much infrequent. For the completionists of the world who are wanting to level up every mobile suit, or even just a significant portion of them, you will have to play through the same levels over and over again, or complete multiple playthroughs of most, or the entire story mode, to earn enough credits, the in-game currency, to be able to do so. Whether the repeated assets, levels, or required multiple playthroughs is a problem is of course up to the player, as repetition can be positive or negative depending on the person. Some may enjoy playing through the same level over and over, in trying to capitalize earnings, try for a damageless run, or any other challenge or goal the player wishes to impose upon themselves. It can be said though that even with story reasons for repeated level locations, surely there could have been more variety, more intricate, or at least more detail in the level design. This is especially amplified considering how absurd the grind can be when wanting to max out multiple mobile suits. As minimal as much of the level design is, as alluded to previously, the same cannot be said for the moment-to-moment gameplay at all. At a glance, Battle Alliance probably looks like most other mech-focused hack-and-slash action games, at least when ignoring the shorter stature. However, that being the type of gameplay is to an extent a decision that can be made by the player. It can be a hack-and-slash action game, with little thought required other than which button to mash, in what order or how fast to mash them, but should the player wish for a challenge, they can absolutely have it. Battle Alliance is built upon a relatively simple level system. Each character, or mobile suit playable to the character, can level 4 different stats: health, melee, range, and boost. Health dictates the number of health points you have, melee your overall physical damage output, range your ranged damage output, and boost is essentially a stamina bar. It determines how many actions you can perform, other than walking, consecutively before you need to stop to let it replenish. These categories can be leveled individually, which will culminate in an overall level for the suit of choice. So even if you ignore the range category, or only level your health for example, your overall mobile suit level will still increase. Each of these categories will have to be leveled to the maximum in order for you to reach the overall max level for that mobile suit. The game, using the traditional level select method of story progression, provides a recommended mobile suit level for each mission before you select it. Your mobile suit level in relation to the recommended level of each mission will be the deciding factor of what type of game you're playing. If you are well over the recommended level, you'll walk through that mission with no struggle or worry, likely not needing to use a single repair kit, the in-game item used for healing, and requiring no assistance from a co-op or NPC companion, of which 2 are available each mission should you choose. Of course, playing co-op with 1 or 2 additional members, other people or NPC, will make that walk in the park only that much easier. If you adhere to those recommended levels and remain within only a couple levels of the recommendation in either direction, you may need a repair kit at some point, depending on the mission in question and your individual abilities, but you'll likely be playing feeling a little more attention is required, but still have the comfort to focus on your moves, stringing together combos, trying different approaches. If you don't overlevel any mobile suits and spend your credits without restriction, aside from not over-leveling, you'll probably have a number of different mobile suits at or around the recommended level to choose from and to experiment with. You won't be able to play recklessly as you would with an over-leveled mobile suit. On the other end of the spectrum, leaving yourself under-leveled, you will have a very real challenge. One that can be punishing and stressful, and that will ask of you near-perfect performance. With less than the recommended levels, what could be a hack-and-slash button masher can quickly become, dare I say, reminiscent of a Souls game. Enemies telegraph their melee attacks, and their ranged attacks have specific stances to indicate a projectile will be coming your way imminently. Each attack is a punishment for your greedy spamming, button mashing, and poorly timed dash away from harm. That's right, there's even a dash. Your boost amount will be limited, so each move will have to have intention and proper timing in its execution. Each class has a limited number of repair kits that cannot be replenished during a mission, and when used, their effects are not instantaneous. Each kit takes time to use, and you can't move during the repair animation. So if you've already made mistakes that led you to take damage, you cannot make mistakes when timing the repair of that damage. If you are attacked during the repair kit animation, it will interrupt it, stopping the process completely. If that interruption doesn't kill you, you will have to start the animation over, and at even lower health than when you tried to repair the first time. In addition to this, attacks are uninterruptible by the player, meaning once you start an attack, you're stuck in that animation until it is either completed or you are forced out of it by an oncoming attack. Each mobile suit also comes with its own unique abilities. These special moves have to connect initially for the animation to complete. What this means is that once your special ability has charged up, you need to hit an enemy with it immediately upon activation. Otherwise, the animation will resolve early as the attack didn't go through, and you will have to wait for that special to recharge all over again. Even if the special ability has an area of effect or splash damage at the end of the animation, if that initial hit doesn't connect with an enemy, the special is wasted. Now, the waste of a special move isn't the end of the world, and certainly not the mission, as depending on the mission length and enemy count, and how much time you take to get through everything, you may be able to use your special ability a few times per mission. But of course, not all of that time, probably not even the majority of it, will be spent fighting a boss when it could be most effective in terms of capitalizing that higher damage output. Battle Alliance is an action game through and through, and can play in various ways depending on how the player wants to tackle each mission. With a massive number of mobile suits, variety across those mobile suits, and leveling decisions to make during progression, there are many hours of gameplay to enjoy for a variety of different types of players. Now, all that action and those gameplay options wouldn't matter much if the game couldn't run properly, would it? During the course of my playthrough and testing, I can honestly say the game runs very smoothly for the overwhelming majority of the time, at least on Xbox Series X. The entirety of my experience was spent on the higher graphics setting as opposed to their performance setting. With that, throughout my first playthrough, which took about 17 hours to complete, I only dropped frames a handful of times, and it was very brief each time. The main issues I had, which come down more to design decisions than strict performance, are actually those of the camera, which conveniently takes us straight into the next section. I know the performance section was very short, but I honestly don't really have anything to say about it. It ran very well, pretty much the whole time. The depth of the camera in relation to the player model is unadjustable, at least manually. The only camera movement you are in control of is rotational, for a full 360 degrees at any angle around the character, bar any obstruction that is. The camera seems to behave as if it were an actual physical object in the world. When placing your character model up against a wall or other object, and rotating the camera to view the model from the side of that wall or object, the camera will often be brought into the character. Alternatively, it will stay on the other side of that object, the game not phasing or fading anything to improve visibility, so the player will see the object and not the character model at all. The camera will adjust to avoid collision with objects in the world, meaning if you are fighting or navigating in a city between tall buildings, your character model and the enemy character models around you will be completely blocked by the building between the camera and the objects in question, or covered by the character model itself, because the camera will be pushed completely up against it, trying to adjust for the buildings on its own. Another example of this is when navigating under small bridges. The character models will be under the bridge, and the player will be able to see nothing if the camera is positioned above the bridge. Or, if at the perfectly wrong angle, the camera will rapidly switch between being too close to the character and behind the bridge, to the point where if left there it could probably induce a seizure because of the rapidly flashing lights and textures on screen. At times this can happen regardless of player input, and can happen despite being locked onto an enemy. In addition to the general odd camera behavior, there are some additional complaints, though none so severe that I feel need to be explained in any great detail, so I'll just list those quickly here. Camera lock-on is excessive, and will move way too fast at times to the point where it can almost be disorienting, pulling your view a full 180 degrees at rapid speed, sometimes back-to-back, depending on the enemy and the arena that you're fighting in. Despite locking on to an enemy, it is frequent that attacks will miss anyways. I understand that this could just be a narrower time requirement of input in relation to enemy movement, or anticipation of enemy movement, but regardless, you don't lock on so you can miss your attacks over and over and over. Maybe I'm just bad though. Permanent lock-on. What I mean by this is that there is a lock-on button, but when not locked on, or after intentionally locking off, if attempting to attack freely, you will automatically re-lock on to the nearest enemy and attack them, not where you were aiming, even if a full 180-degree turn is required to do so. Excessive pop-up windows to announce newly available missions, almost non-stop dialogue during the missions, no dubbed audio options. My last point is basically just the two previous points combined. With near non-stop dialogue and none of it in English, I either have to ignore the gameplay to read the subtitles, or ignore the exposition altogether to focus exclusively on the gameplay, neither of which I particularly want to do. The third option being to learn Japanese, which, as much as I would love to, that is simply not a viable option for me personally right now, nor should it be a requirement to get the full experience of the game. There may be some questionable design decisions, maybe even some lazy decisions using narrative structure as an excuse, or maybe a bug or two here and there, but this is all around a solid gaming experience, and the frustrations and shortcomings are easily outweighed by the huge amount of options provided to the player and the tight moment-to-moment combat. SD Gundam Battle Alliance provides an easy time consumer for the casual button masher, a brutal challenge for the hardcore, and a place to sink an unreasonable amount of hours into the grind for the completionist, if that's your cup of tea. Despite the faults, it has a lot to offer and a respectable amount of variety in its own way that can have a little something for everyone, whatever type of play you prefer. On top of that, if you're a Gundam fan or lore expert, you are just about guaranteed to have an absolute blast. It will almost overload you with the plethora of references and story strung throughout every step of the narrative. If you're on the fence, have any interest in the game, or are already a Gundam fan or wanting to get into Gundam, but aren't sure where to start, whatever the case may be, I would happily recommend SD Gundam Battle Alliance. This title is very much deserving of the full launch it received, and I'm hoping this leads to more SD Gundam games with full Western releases in the future. Also, if there are any Gundam lore experts watching who already played the game, it would be awesome to hear your thoughts on the story and how it relates to the rest of the Gundam universe, or universes. Either way, if you played it, let me know what you thought and let me know if I missed anything. I'm sure my experience doesn't cover what everyone's experience has been, so I'd love to hear how yours was. Let me know in the comments. Anyways, stay happy, stay healthy, and I hope to see you next time. Thanks for watching.